Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Out and About. We're back at the Greystone Mansion for the 5th annual Concours d'Elegance. Let's go have a look at some of the cars. I'm here with Jeff Brynan. This is quite an event today, Jeff. How many classes are there? How many people are you expecting?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for your kind words. We have 16 classes of cars today. We're expecting a sold-out crowd of about 3,500 people. We have 145 cars, which is literally every single available spot.
Excellent.
And we're pretty excited about that. This is only the 5th year of the event. Our first year we had 90 cars. So from 90 to 145 has been quite we take it as quite a compliment that people have enjoyed the show and come back and the audience has grown.
Absolutely, absolutely. And who benefits from this event?
The event is actually officially a City of Beverly Hills event. It's done in connection with the Friends of Greystone, which is a charity to raise money for the ongoing preservation of the Greystone estate, which I think a lot of people don't know is one of the very few nationally registered historic landmarks in all of Southern California. So quite a few years ago, it was almost marked for the wrecking ball. And fortunately, my wife is the director of all the events that go on. Cindy Bryan is her name, of all the events that go on at Greystone. And through her efforts in the Friends of Greystone, they've got the estate back up and running and the gardens back as they once were. Thank you so much.
They're beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Well, what did you bring to the event today?
I brought today a 1957 Speedster that our family owns. We used it as the poster car for the event and for the program because this year we're celebrating the 60th anniversary of the introduction of the Speedster. We have another class that's for the 50th anniversary of the Mustang, and then a class to honor the 100th anniversary of the City of Beverly Hills, which was founded in 1914. So we have what we're calling the Centennial class of cars made 1914 or earlier.
I'm here with Jay Leno. He's an avid car collector. And what'd you bring to the Concours today?
I brought what appears to be a 1930 Bentley. It's got a 27-liter Merlin aircraft engine in it. It's actually based on a Rolls-Royce P2 chassis. It's made to look like a Bentley, just bigger and taller and heavier than any Bentley ever was because it's got an airplane engine in it.
Jay, how did you happen to pick this car out of all of your cars in your collection to bring to the Concours today?
I don't know. I just picked this one, I guess. I don't know, because I haven't brought this one before, probably.
Okay.
That'd be a good reason, sure.
Okay, sure. Okay, it's an awesome car.
Oh, thanks.
Would you give us a closer-up look?
As I mentioned, it's got a 27-liter Merlin aircraft engine in it. This looks like a supercharger that would be on a supercharged Bentley. It's actually, it's just a cover. We have the alternators under there, and we have an oil cooler under there as well. What appear to be big drum brakes are actually disc brakes hidden inside the drums. So it's got a lot of modern features. It's got an automatic transmission. It's got power steering. And it's a lot of fun to drive. As you can see, it's got a pretty big wheelbase. And this is obviously the exhaust on the engine here. And that's basically it. It's fuel injected and it's pretty quick. As you see, it has a traditional Bentley sort of dashboard. You got full complement of gauges. You've got a few aircraft pieces in there. There's a couple of light switches off a Lancaster bomber and a Merlin engine start switch, and the usual oil pressure and tachometer, speedometer, and aero gauges on there as well. And you've got the aero switches for the lights and the magneto. So it's a lot of fun.
What's it like going down the road in this and somebody sees you?
I mean, it's a lot of fun to drive. It's got a lot of horsepower. It gives you a real vintage feel. Modern cars are pretty sterile. So this, the wind's in your face and it makes a lot of airplane noises. It's like it's like taxiing an airplane all the time. That's basically what it is.
What's the horsepower?
About 650, 700.
I'm here with Leslie Kendall from the Peterson. Good to see you again, Leslie.
Betty, it's great to see you.
And what did you bring today?
We brought a 1929 DuPont Model G Speedster, one of only 6 ever built, one of only 5 that survived.
Is there a story with this car?
There's a story. Let me tell you all about it.
Okay.
Here we go.
Okay.
All right, this 1929 DuPont has a very familiar name, and that's because it was built by a very familiar family, the DuPont family in Wilmington, Delaware, the chemical family. They decided, you know what, we could do this pretty good. We can build cars, and build cars they did. They built some marvelous Grand Classics, but very, very few 8-cylinders like this car, especially the Model G Speedster. Has a very large engine, about 7 liters, and believe it or not, this car was sold brand new in Los Angeles by Von Trump Motors. And of the 6 that were built, one was actually owned by Mary Pickford. Unfortunately, that is the one that is known to have been destroyed. But that's okay, because there are 5 more. From beginning to end, I think one of the things that you have to notice is the overall proportions of the car. But once you get over that, you start at the front and you kind of work your way backwards. And the first thing you're going to notice on this particular car is the genuine Lalique radiator mascot. Not a hood ornament, they call this a radiator mascot. And Lalique had a couple of dozen of these different styles that you could buy out of a catalog, and they were literally thousands of makers, but very, very few made the crystal. And if you wanted, you could actually have a little light underneath so that when you turn on the lights at night, that would light up too. And speaking of lights at night, this car is equipped with what they call wood lights. They're not the normal round drum headlights. They're the little, very directed headlights. They're supposed to throw a beam that is much more efficient than other headlights, but it doesn't really do that in practice, but they sure look good. Then you go down a little bit farther, you notice this massive bumper, this incredible grille, which for 1929 was really pretty advanced, because this is a grille shell that actually blended in with the body. It wasn't separate like they were on so many other cars of the day. Well, working our way back, you can't help but notice this incredibly long hood. It takes up about half of the length of the car. And also these sweeping fenders, which were kind of a DuPont trademark. They extend out of the body about 4 inches, and it's almost like they're floating in air. Back farther, you get to the cockpit, and there's only one door on this car. It's on the passenger side, so even the driver has to climb in. Open it, climb in, and it's a pretty snug fit. Notice also, it's a true roadster. There's really no provision for weather protection other than a little canopy top that pops up from behind and snaps to the windshield header. And one of the other things that distinguishes this car as a hand-built car, truly a hand-built car, are little details like this, like the wooden running board with the chrome slats on it. It's just something that you don't find on cars that were mass-produced. This is something that was definitely bespoke, built one at a time for an individual customer. Moving back, the fender ends at the rear, kind of kicks up a little bit, kind of a sexy little flick, and in the rear is where the real interesting part is. This is a true boat tail speedster. Well, this is what they mean when they say boat tail. This is a true boat tail. It almost looks like if you took this off and you turned it upside down, you can row down a river in it, and that's the whole idea. To have something really, really sporting, not especially practical, but boy did it look good going down the road. Well, I think the first thing most people notice about this cockpit is how snug it is. It's really meant for only 2 people, 2 very lucky people. The driver, you'll notice, has a very, very large steering wheel. And that's because it takes an awful lot of effort. This is before the days of power steering, don't forget. And you've got a very, very large engine sitting right over the front wheel. So you need all that kind of leverage. You also notice that the dashboard is engine turning. It's all engine turning, Damascene. The gauges, more gauges than you would have on a lot of cars in 1929. They wanted to keep you really, really well informed. And starting the car is actually pretty easy. You can do it all from the inside. No getting out and cranking. Turn the key, adjust the choke, push the starter button, which is on the floor, and it fires right up. Really a reliable car. And once you're underway, it's got a reverse, but it also has a 4-speed. You could either get it with a 3-speed or 4-speed, and this has a much rarer 4-speed transmission. So whoever ordered this car new from Von Trump Motors in Los Angeles really knew what they were doing. Well, here we are at the 29 DuPont, looking under the hood at this massive engine. It's about 7 liters. And glancing at it, you would think it's an overhead valve unit, but it's really not. DuPont kind of wanted to conceal the fact that this was a regular flathead, straight 8, not a bad thing, but it wasn't an overhead valve like this, like you might think. But kind of coming down on the side, and you look that both the exhaust and the intake manifolds are porcelainized. They're both porcelainized. They're really attractive. Keep in mind this is a bespoke car. They built these one at a time, and it's got an updraft carburetor, which means that it sucks air and the fuel up from the bottom and then into the intake manifold. Not always an easy car to start, but once it's set up, it starts right away. There's no problem at all. We've got a working light on the cowl. We've got a a horn on the other side, and the badge for the body is on the inside of the cowl too, so people know exactly what they're looking at. All in all, quite a piece of jewelry.
I'm here with Don Murray, and what did you bring to the Concours today?
We brought a 1959 Carrera GS Speedster. It's the last VIN number Speedster made, and a GT Speedster was a race car that people could buy right from the factory and go out and race right away. So it's very lightweight. It came with a factory roll bar. It came with a 4-cam race engine, so they're pretty rare cars.
Would you give us a closer-up look?
A close-up, of course, sure. Some of the differences between a Carrera GT and a Carrera GS or a regular Speedster is that the deck lid is aluminum for lightweight, so it's a very lightweight car. There's no undercoating on the car. The undersides were just spray painted, so they didn't have the weight of undercoating on the car. One of the details that I don't want you to miss is the body badge. And the body badge is custom bodywork by Reuters. Reuters was a German bodybuilder, and because this car was even more special with the aluminum features on it, Reuters built most of, or a lot of Porsche bodies for 356s. Porsche ended up buying the company and it became an in-house bodybuilder for them. If you look at the doors, again, are very lightweight doors compared to the steel doors of a regular Speedster or a typical Porsche at the time. The interior is very bare. So the theme of this car is lightweight for racing. And if you look at the interior, it doesn't have a heater, doesn't have a radio. There's no extras on the car. They just have thin rubber floor mats. And everything was done to keep the car as lightweight as possible for racing. You'll notice the car has a roll bar. It came from the factory because it was meant to be a race car. It came from the factory with the roll bar, so it's a factory installed roll bar. I'd like to show you what makes this car very special, and that's the engine. So the engines in this car are not the typical 356 pushrod engine. This engine is a 4-cam race motor designed specifically for racing, and it's a very high output motor compared to the typical 356 motor. So this is the heart of the car and what makes it really an effective racing car. And the aluminum, again, is carried over on the engine lid. That's all aluminum also. Just something about a little special about the engine, because it's a race motor, because it was built as a race car. You notice there's no air cleaners on the carburetors. It's just what they call velocity stacks to let more air in, which gives you more horsepower and a better fuel mixture. The car doesn't have a muffler. It has a Stingray exhaust. And so there's no muffler on it. It's just a free exhaust, which means that the car makes an incredible, beautiful sound when you're driving. So I brought this book along, and if you look very carefully at the bottom, you'll see a red car, and it says the last one on the license plate, and that's this car. So this book is the definitive book about 356 Carreras. This car is featured on it as the last Speedster built, which happens to be a Carrera GT Speedster.
I'm here with Jeff Brynan. Well, what did you bring to the event today?
I brought today a 1957 Speedster that our family owns. We used it as the poster car for the event and for the program because this year we're celebrating the 60th anniversary of the introduction of the Speedster.
Well, can we have a closer-up look of what you brought today,
Sure,
the
absolutely.
Speedster?
This right here is our Speedster that we brought to the event today. It's a 1957 356A Porsche Speedster. We've owned the car for about 10 years, I think it is now. And the long and the short of it is, as a young boy, I always wanted one. Speedsters were made very famous by James Dean, is probably one of the most well-known owners of the Speedster, and Steve McQueen, and a few others. It was a very popular car back in the 50s, and being a child of that era, I just always loved them, and had an opportunity to finally buy this car and just enjoy the heck out of it. And I can show you a few more things on the car if you'd like. The front end here we have from the 50s era Marshall driving lights, and other than that the car is totally standard as it came from the factory. And Speedsters, if you don't know them, aren't familiar with them, or pretty basic car, and they were purposely designed that way. They're actually the brainchild of a man named Max Hoffman, who was Porsche's first distributor in the United States, and he convinced Porsche to make a very basic, simple car that would sell for under $3,000. And they sort of fought the idea, but finally came around, and the car was a huge success. And today they remain, to this day, probably one of the most popular collector cars around. And this year, like I say, at the event, we're honoring the 60th anniversary. The car was first introduced in 1954, and we have, I think, 15 here today. And like I say, this is my pride and joy. We're looking at a shot of the interior of the car, and you can see just how basic it is. You have 2 bucket seats and really no other thrills. By 57, what this car is, they finally put in a heater, and that's about it. You have 3 gauges and the lights, and as you can see, there's no windows. You have plastic side curtains that get put into these little holes that are in the doors, but no wind-up windows, and just a fold-down top that's underneath the cover here. And that's it. No cup holders, no navigation system, pretty much seat belts, and the steering wheel is about the only features that come with the car. And truly what the car was designed for, this windshield was made, it slides into these 2 brackets, and it was made so that you could drive the car to work during the week and then slip out the windshield and go racing on the weekend. And that was truly what the purpose of the car was. And then in second here, I'll open up the rear deck lid and we can take a look at the engine. Here's obviously the engine compartment of the car. It's a basic 356 1600 cc engine. We did have the engine rebuilt a few years ago so that it's all shiny and new, if you will. You know, Porsche has always been known for making very efficient engines. They're air-cooled. It's not the most blazing fast car, if you will, but they handle magnificently, and you got enough power that they'll take on most cars in their same class, and usually were quite successful cars. This particular engine was built back to complete factory standards. It even has a little hang tag here on the oil filler that when you would get your car serviced back in the day, as they say, they used Castrol oil, and they put a little Castrol tag on the oil filler to show that the service was complete. And we were lucky enough to find one of those tags and put that on the car. And as I say, everything else has been built back to exact factory standards. And that's really about it. It's about as basic a car really as you can get, but I think it's for that very reason that they're so appreciated by collectors and historic race drivers and all, that the car was built for a very specific purpose and meets that purpose really well. So I'm very excited that we had the opportunity to buy this car, and again honored that for the 60th anniversary we were able to use it for the poster and program for this year's event. And I don't know what else really to say, just a happy owner.
I'm here with Tony Rackley. It's good to see you again, Tony.
Always a pleasure, Betty. Always a pleasure. My pleasure, love.
And you brought cars from what collection?
From the A&A Premier Classics collection out of Riverside.
And what did you bring today?
Today I bought 2 cars. First car I bought is this 1963 AC Cobra, Shelby AC Cobra. And it's a very interesting car. It's serial number CXX 2044.
Okay, and what else did you bring?
I bought a 1969 Boss 429.
All right,
Mustang, yeah. It's some big. So I brought some big power today.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Normally I bring some pre-war stuff, which is a bit, archaic and slow and cumbersome, but these cars get up and go. So I made some noise today.
Okay, all right. Oh, can we look at the Cobra first?
Absolutely. And this is CSX 2044. This car was originally purchased by a chap called Dr. Harrison Hap Horn, and we actually have the letter that he sent to Carroll Shelby dated March 17th inquiring about this particular car. And back in March of 1963 nobody knew about these cars, so for someone to actually inquire, I'm sure Shelby was impressed. So this car is the very first car with a 289 engine. The first 74 cars were 260s, but VIN number 2044, 45 and 46 were special order 289s, and this is 44. And originally it was $59.95, but with all the extras that the HAP ordered, it came up to $69.95. And some of the features included inertia seat belts and also a full roll bar. Okay, let me introduce you to this monster engine for 1963. It's a 289, 271 horsepower. And for a light car like this, it really gets up and goes. Okay, and as you can see on this car, the interior is still original. Dr. Horn owned this car, as I mentioned before, from May 21st is when he took delivery, 1963, up until 1991. It basically broke an exhaust 32 years prior to that, and it sat in the garage for all its time. A chap called Lynn Park, a noted Cobra collector, bought the car from the owner, and the owner would only sell it to him if he knew he was the right guy. He didn't want to pass this car on just to anybody. He wanted someone to appreciate it as he did for the many years that he owned it. And Lynn Park was just that such chap. And Lynn had the car repainted, but left the interior original, as you can see, and it's got a beautiful patina to it. This car originally is a British car, so you can see the gauges are all British. They're Smith's gauges, and this car obviously started life as an AC Ace with very meager power, and then when Carroll Shelby came along and put the Ford V8 in it, he really created a monster, and you know, a noted car that everybody sees. Whenever they see it, they know it's a Cobra. Hi, and this is our 1969 Mustang Boss 429. It's one of the early cars built. It was one of the first 50 which were known as priority cars. They were brought out in a rush to get on to people to see them. It has a monster 429 engine that was a NASCAR motor that they developed, and they had to put them in street cars, so this is what happened. This is how this car became about. This is the 429 NASCAR motor. It's 375 horsepower, just a beast of a motor. As you can see, there's hardly any room around either side. Okay, the interior is finished in black vinyl and pretty much the stock Mustang interior with the wood trim and the gauge package. This thing really got up and going. It's a 4-speed Muncie. It's a bit of a handful. It's really, really loud, as you could imagine with a motor this size, and fun to drive.
I'm here with Chris Cord. And can you tell us a little bit about the Cord name and the car behind us?
Yes, indeed. The car behind me is a 1937 Cord 812 Cabriolet, supercharged. My grandfather, E.L. Cord, produced this car back in 1937, and it's supercharged, and it's called a 812 Cord Cabriolet. And this is one of 63 that came out of the factory with superchargers on it. So the car will do well in excess of 100 miles an hour. So in its day, it was the sort of the ultimate sports car, if you will.
Sounds like it's really fun to drive.
It's fun to drive, and interestingly enough, you can drive it like a modern car. I mean, you can go down the freeway or wherever you need to go at 70, 80 miles an hour and just lope along. So people just love seeing it.
Well, thank you for bringing it to the Concours today. Can you give us a closer-up look?
Yes, of course. So this car, 1937 Cord Cabriolet, supercharged, 812, was a front-wheel drive, one of the first front-wheel drive American cars, and it has a V8 engine, supercharged, and it was very much of a car that was capable of over 100 miles an hour. One of the features of this car, it is unique, is the sort of coffin nose design by a man named Gordon Burig, and has a very much of a deco look to it. And back in 1937, this car was the absolute avant-garde, most forward design in the automotive world. And today, it is still regarded by many designers as one of the top 5 designs of all time. So it's a very special car, and we're very proud to be the owner of this car. One other feature I'd like to talk to you about is the headlights on this car disappear into the fenders, and this was to give it a kind of a smooth, very aerodynamic look. And the the headlights are cranked up by a cable in the cockpit, and so you can put them up or down based on however you want to, however you need. But the overall look of the car is very streamlined, very, very clean, if you will. And so this is an iconic car and still lives today in history as one of the great designs of all time. So on this car, one of the features is the suicide doors, which as I open it, you will see is exactly that. Unusual design, but it is unique to this car. And behind these doors, there's a disappearing convertible top. So when you have it in a convertible state as it is now, the car has a complete smooth flowing design, and it just makes it just one of the most beautiful cars ever produced. And so it's a pleasure to drive. It's a car that can be driven on a daily basis. It has performance that allows you to enjoy it on today's highways and byways and freeways. And we do drive it, and that's part of the joy of having this car, is being able to drive it and have people recognize it, and so we're very happy with it. So on the interior of this beautiful car, you can see a sort of what looks like a spun aluminum dash, and that has very much of an aircraft aviation sort of look to it. And on the dash also there are cranks. There you can open and close the headlights. The car is a front wheel drive, and the shifting mechanism on this car is very unique. It's there's a stem that comes across out of the steering wheel, and you select a gear, and it's like what they call a pre-select, and you select the gear on the column, and then you get the gear when you depress the clutch. So this was very, very much forward design, forward thinking in terms of incorporating these features into this car to make it like none other. So it's from that standpoint, the interior was as advanced as the overall design of the car. So this car is a front wheel drive, as I earlier mentioned, and it also has a V8, flathead V8 in it, and is supercharged, which gives it approximately 190 to 200 horsepower, which makes it perform wonderfully. But it's unique in terms of there were only 63 of this model that came out of the Cord factory with a supercharger on it. So it all kind of ties into the whole performance package: design, speed, very, very futuristic look. And so this really, the engine and the performance of this car really is completed by what's underneath the hood. And so this is a pretty darn special car for 1936, 1937. Driving this car is, you would think you were perhaps in a very modern car, because it shifts well, it stops well, it will run 80 or 90 miles an hour down the freeway with the power that it has. So in many ways, it's a very modern car, and from the overall design of the car, exterior and interior and engine-wise, it's pretty contemporary in terms of what we have today. So back in its day, it was very advanced, to say the least.
I'm here with Gino Hare. And what did you bring from the driving museum?
Well, I brought a 1904 Schacht. And the Schacht is a product of the Schacht brothers, who were German immigrants, came here before the turn of the last century, and they started producing automobiles. They were bicycle people before, and then they started making trucks, and then they started making bigger trucks, and then they eventually stopped making the automobiles because the trucks took up all their time and effort. And what we have here is a 1904 Highboy.
Can we have a closer-up look?
Of course. Well, some of the features I'd like to show you about this unique automobile. It's different than most, even for the era that it was made, and that is it doesn't have a transmission. Instead, it has a system called friction drive, and it's quite ingenious. And while the Schacht was not the only vehicle to use this system, there were far and few that did use it. So one of the features I'd like to show you is this mode of drive, or the powertrain, called friction drive, and it doesn't have a transmission. What it has is a friction wheel that is powered by a rotating disc that is attached to the flywheel. And the flywheel rotates and rotates the disc with it, and that in turn turns this friction wheel with this friction material on the face of it, and it turns it with the contact to the driven disc, which is part of the flywheel. And instead of a transmission, that lever there moves this friction disc along a tracked canister. And the further away from the center of the crankshaft the friction wheel is moved, the higher the ratio. The closer to the center of the crankshaft, the lower the ratio. So it's quite ingenious. And if you go past the center point, you're in reverse. The car will theoretically go just as fast in reverse as it goes forward. And in a 1904 vehicle, that's a frightening concept. But it works very well, and it could only be used in low horsepower, low torque, lightweight vehicles, because you only have about 1.5 inches of contact surface between the friction disc and the driving disc. And it's quite unique, and it is not entirely exclusive to the Schacht, but it is rare nonetheless. This is the ignition switch, and this is the equivalent of turning the key on in a modern car. Now I'm turning it off. That supplies electricity to the coils, which in turn send a spark to the spark plugs and fire the cylinders. Another unique feature of this automobile is that the clutch and brake pedal are different than on a modern automobile. The clutch works just the opposite of the way a modern clutch works. When you step on the clutch pedal, it engages, and when you release it, it disengages. And you can see there's a little pawl here that locks in to these ratcheting teeth, and that's what keeps the clutch engaged while you're driving, so you don't have to hold your foot on the pedal all the time. And then you just hit it, and it pops off. And the brakes only work rear wheel brakes. And another interesting feature of this car is that they are internal expanding brake shoes, whereas the cars that had brakes in those days, they were external contracting. And internal expanding is far superior. So, and then this up here, you have the throttle and the ignition timing here. So you don't work the throttle with your foot at all. Now from the side view here, you can see that the car is chain driven. So there's a chain on this side and a chain on the other side. And there's actually a differential inside that friction wheel housing that we saw before that acts as a modern differential. The brakes, as we discussed before, are internal expanding brake shoes, and you can see the beautiful quality of the way they were executed, which is far beyond other cars of the era. It's an amazing production attempt for back in that time. And as you can see, it starts with a hand crank, and this is the engine. It is a 2-cylinder piston-opposed engine with a blind cylinders, meaning there's no heads, so you don't have to worry about blowing a head gasket. And this is the distributor, even though it doesn't look like one, it is. And this is the coils. There's 2 coils, one for each cylinder. This brass thing about the size of a fist is the carburetor. And then, of course, you have the spark plugs. And then the cooling water, or coolant mixture, nowadays we have antifreeze in it, comes up out of these 2 pipes, out of the heads, and goes forward underneath the car all the way to the front into the radiator. Now, the water pump isn't much to speak about, but it does work minimally, and there's no cooling fan on the radiator. So you have to keep it moving. Once you start it, you keep it moving. And this is a very interesting aspect. This is the oil reservoir. Inside here is the oil. And this is the oil pumps. The oil pump is turned and operated by a camshaft down at the bottom of the reservoir. And when this wheel turns, when the crankshaft turns, it turns this wheel, and that cam rotates. And each one of these has a separate plunger all their own. And each one of these is adjustable. And it sends oil under pressure to every bearing in the engine. It is very rare for a 1904 vehicle to have something like this. And you can adjust the oil supply to every bearing on the engine separately of all the other bearings. So if you have a bearing that is starting to wear, you can increase the oil supply to that bearing only. And that way it allows the engine to live a little longer than it normally would. It's an amazing piece of engineering.
I'm here with Bill Lyon. It's good to see you again.
Great to see you.
I guess the Palos Verdes Concours is the last time I saw you.
Yeah, that was a few years ago, but great to see you again.
So what did you bring to the Beverly Hills Concours this year?
We brought a 1965 Alfa Romeo TZ2.
Can we have a closer-up look?
Of course. Okay, this is a 1965 Alfa Romeo TZ2, one of about a dozen built and one of the 6 Auto Delta team cars. This car raced at Le Mans, at Monza, at Nürburgring, at Sebring, and then this livery is really the Targa Florio 1966 livery, where it had a very good finish of 10th overall and 2nd in class, I believe. Okay, so again, this is a 1965 Alfa Romeo TZ2. As you can see, it's a very low roofline car. It was a modification of the TZ1 chassis, of which they built about 100 of them and got them homologated for racing. But they could build a very limited number that were really redesigned for lower drag. They were quite hot, though, both on the engine and on the driver. And you can see there's a number of vents that were added throughout the life of the car to both ventilate the cockpit and the engine area. So it definitely evolved over time. There's inboard brakes in the transaxle, and this is a duct that sucks air back out of there, and then there's a push ram air vent on the other side, all for brake cooling of the rear of the car. Okay, so we're at the rear of the car now. This is a Zagata designed body in fiberglass, different from the TZs, which were all in aluminum, but have a very distinctive camtail design. Pretty indicative of 1960s, mid-1960s race cars. We restored the car to race it in vintage races. It hasn't been raced since the restoration yet, but has a roll cage and a few other safety enhancements for that. But does have these access panels on either side of the rear tail, which I haven't seen on any other of the TZ2s, so it's made it handy to identify in historic photographs, which I can show you some in a couple minutes here. The interior of the car is quite snug, given the low roof line, but everything the driver needs is right in front of the steering wheel. The tachometer, speedometer, sort of unusually, is clear over on the passenger side of the car, which I guess in a race you didn't really need to worry about how fast you were going, just the revs. So pretty efficient little cockpit and great little car once you're in it. Getting in and out, though, is a little bit of a challenge. Okay, now I'd like to show you the engine. This is a 4-cylinder, under 1.6 liter Alfa Romeo twin plug engine that was similar to what would be later used in the GTAs. And it's a pretty potent little engine, putting out about 165 horsepower, take this car to nearly 140 miles an hour. So for a 4-cylinder under a liter, about 1.5 liters and change is pretty remarkable. One of the great things about this car is it's been widely photographed during its race career, and so I put together a book with some of the photos, kind of tracing the car's history and racing, and I'd like to show you a few of them while we have a minute here. The first race I have photos of it was Le Mans in 1965, and it was hard to identify the car in the photos. It's actually wearing a license plate from a TZ1 that was crashed a couple months earlier, and we have this basically the pit sheet for the car, which details who the drivers were and even the mechanical problem that put it out of the race later in the running. Also have some pictures from Sebring in 1966, where the car ran in the U.S. Again, totally different livery. At this point, having fog lights cut in for nighttime racing. And here's kind of that distinctive cutouts in the tail that we looked at a little bit earlier, as well as the license plate, so you can clearly identify the car. This was Monza in 1966. Looks like a rainy, wet, probably cold day. They, again, now have sort of patched up a lot of the holes on the car for ventilation, as they didn't need them like they did in Florida. And sort of the big star for this car was at the Targa Florio in 1966, one of 4 team cars that entered and did quite well in the race, second in class and 10th overall. Just numerous photographs throughout the event, sort of the classic one being this one on the right, your right here, which in color, and you can see all the crowd right against the track where they used to do. A few others from Targa Florio, and then the last early race I have, Monza 1967, when Club Jolly was racing the car. Prior to that, it was the factory team, Auto Delta, and then it's made its way to England, the United States, and Japan ultimately before coming back to California. So it's been a great car, and the finished product up at Pebble Beach in 2009. Thank you for letting us share this beautiful car with you.
I'm here with Wanda Meitinger. And what did you bring to the Concours today? And I understand there's a very special story.
There is. It's a 1967 GT500 Shelby that my brother restored. It was his dream car. He found it. It was in, somebody had in his garage all the original parts, the shell, everything, for 20 years, and he bought it and restored it. But unfortunately, when he finished it, he got Lou Gehrig's disease, so he's unable to drive it a few times. So I'm here. I bring it to the shows in honor of him.
Oh, wow. What a memory this car has.
Yeah. This was his dream car, and he did ride in it for many years, but he was unable to drive it. So his friends helped restore it, and it's a beautiful car.
I understand you have one of his friends that helped restore it here at the Concours.
That's Eric Riggert, and he's right here, and he can tell you all the details about the car. This is a picture of my brother, Roy, and this is him in the car when it was first finished, and it goes in the car everywhere we go. And this is Eric Riggert, one of his best friends that helped him restore the car, and I'm going to turn over to him and let him tell you a little bit of history about the car. Here you go, Eric.
Well, before I say anything, I have to also mention Harry Gray and Dean Lucero, who are also on that list of friends who helped restore this car with Roy. So Roy picked up this car around 1999, and he had looked for 10 years for any kind of 1967 fastback Mustang with a big block engine and a manual transmission, and he couldn't find one. He couldn't find one. He couldn't find one. Finally, he got a line on this car, and it was sitting stored away somewhere. It had been taken apart for 20 years, and it was in a million pieces. And he got a real deal on bringing this basket case home, and got an earful from his family for bringing home this bucket of bolts, which came home on a trailer and in a van and in another storage kind of a truck. Yeah, so there's pictures of it as a Hulk. But all his car friends came over and cheered with him because we knew he'd gotten a real gem. And the car was in pieces but complete. And the original owner had taken it apart in 1980 to restore it with his son. And unfortunately, they did not finish, but they had purchased many original parts from the Ford dealership. So the car came with lots of brand new parts in boxes. And Roy was an engineer, and he spent a little while coming up with a comprehensive 2-year plan that took 4 years to restore this car. And he even went as far as finding the person that wove the original taillight looms for Shelby in '67, and he sent away the rear harnesses to that person and had them redone, and he just researched every little bit of this car, and then all the friends would come over and help him put it together. So it's a '67 GT500, and it's got a 428 Police Interceptor in it, and it's got the rare wood steering wheel option. And other than that, a fairly basic black interior. It does not have a console. So this was a real labor of love for Roy and for all of us. And we put the car together with him over the course of many weekends in his garage. And we And in the end, we drove it around the neighborhood with just a milk crate in the seat, and we it was great.
I don't remember that.
I do. And partway through the restoration, Roy was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, and it was so important for all of us to make sure that he got to enjoy the car.
It's hard to talk about.
So we finished it with him, and we made sure he could drive it. And then when he couldn't drive it, we gave him rides in it. And when he couldn't get into it, we drove it for him while he drove along in a wheelchair assist van, and got to hear it. And Roy was so fun. His intention was for this car to be used like it was built to be used. So whenever he had somebody driving it, he would he'd say, "Punch it!" or
Drive it like you stole it.
"Drive it like you stole it." This car was intended to be used that way, and that's how he had us drive it, with him and without him. And so we bring it out to all these shows as kind of a Roy tribute, a Roy memorial. And we just enjoying it with the family and keeping it like Roy liked it. So the '67 Shelby was based on a Ford Mustang Fastback, and so it has the Fastback body style, which includes the fold-down rear seat, which can become a carpeted package tray. And on top of that, Shelby added a padded roll bar that was standard on Shelbys, and from the roll bar are mounted 2 racing harnesses on retractable belts, sort of a Y harness. In addition, the body was lengthened slightly with a fiberglass extensions on the nose and on the tail to give a slightly different front treatment and rear treatment, and scoops were added to the sides for the brakes are fed by the lower scoop. There's actually an air vent that goes to the area behind the rear wheels, and the upper scoop actually feeds the fresh air inlets that are inside the C-pillar. So this car is fairly lightly optioned. It does have the deluxe stainless steel dash treatment, which is the interior decor group for a '67 Mustang. This car's got a 428 police interceptor with a 4-speed top loader manual transmission. And inside, just below the radial, you'll see 2 gauges. Those are Shelby installed ammeter and oil pressure gauges. And this car has a standard AM radio with 1 speaker in the dash and 2 in the doors. So this car has the rare Shelby wooden steering wheel, which was not included on every Shelby. That was a fairly unusual option, so you don't see it that often. But this car has the original steering wheel, which hasn't been refinished or anything. So under the hood, there's a 428 police interceptor engine, which it's the only year that Shelby put a dual quad intake on a 428 in his in one of the GT500 models. Later, Ford switched to a single carburetor in the 68 and up models, and it's got dual Holley carburetors. And this engine doesn't have a lot of power accessories. It has power steering and power brakes, but there's no air conditioning or anything like that. On a dyno, we're at about 300 horsepower, but it feels like quite a bit more because the car's so light compared to a modern car. So it's got front disc brakes and rear drums. And then when you look around the rest of the engine compartment, you can see standard 60s Ford things. I mean, the windshield wiper reservoir is a bag. It's not even a sealed bag. There's no overflow for the radiator, but it's a large radiator with a shroud. The engine actually runs fairly cool, even in continued running. Roy did his best to research every little bit of the tubing and hoses and everything else on this engine, and when it came down to things like the oil fill pipe and the location of the coil, which is in an unusual location for a Shelby, but it's apparently the original location for this car. We made every effort to put it back to exactly how all the records for this car showed it was. This car has Coney shock absorbers in it. I don't recall if those are factory for Shelby. My guess is they are, knowing Roy.
I'm here with Bruce Meyer, and you brought a very special car to the event today. Can you tell us about it?
Sure. This is serial number 1. It's CSX 2001, so it's the very first production car built by Carroll Shelby in 1962.
And he signed it.
He signed it, and right after it was built, it was sent to Europe to race at Le Mans. So it's been in France pretty much its whole life. It went in 1963, and I repatriated the car in about 10 years ago. I found it in France, and we brought it back over and have been enjoying it ever since.
Can we have a closer up look?
Sure. What we have here is the very first production Cobra, and it is different than the early Cobras in the fact that it has larger wings, which are fenders in English, and it has special racing wheels, a 289 FIA high horsepower Le Mans spec engine, a roll bar. It has the original leather interior in it that's getting a little worn at this point, but it has a very unique look, and that's why we put the number 1 on it, because it is the first. This is a race-proven engine and has been success in many forms of racing, but here we have a basically FIA spec engine with 4 Weber carburetors. It generates about 350 to 400 horsepower, which is enough to beat the Corvettes and any of the other oncomers. But it is spectacular, it's great looking, and it is a 289, and it's the same engine that was in the Mustangs and many of the other Ford race cars. But I think the Cobra made it the most successful. We have the original interior still in the car, which is a bit worn, but it's been in use since 1962, so you would expect to see some wear and tear. Carroll Shelby was a personal great friend of mine. We went to many events together, and he was kind enough to sign the car. He was excited to see it restored. Serial number 1.
Thank you for joining Peninsula Seniors Out and About. I'm Betty Wheaton. See you next time.